On today's show, we're going to talk about whether or not the Cavs can and should trade for Brooklyn Nets forward Cam Johnson. Plus, the Utah Jazz made a very interesting trade involving some of the picks they got from the Cavs. I want to talk about what exactly that tells me, how NBA teams feel about the Cleveland Cavaliers. We'll do all that. Plus, Adam Armbrecht from Locked On Nets stops by. We talk a ton about Cam Johnson. All that is straight ahead right here on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? My name is Danny Cunningham. You might know me from my time covering the Cleveland Cavaliers, places like my Substack, The Inside Shot, Cleveland Magazine, 92.3 The Fan, a number of other stops along the way. I want to say thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure a friend is subscribed as well. The show also available on YouTube. So if you're watching this right now, do me a favor, hit that thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode, of course, sponsored by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Also, Locked On Cavs now has a newsletter introducing the Locked On Cavs daily newsletter, your one stop for ultimate team and league coverage delivered right to your inbox. Sign up for free now at LockedOnDaily.com. That is LockedOnDaily.com. Start your day with the all-new free Locked On Cavs newsletter. So I already recorded a full monologued opening segment for this show. And then the Phoenix Suns made a trade with the Utah Jazz. And instantly, if you didn't see what this trade was, you're probably going, well, how does that affect the Cleveland Cavaliers? And it does and it doesn't. And this trade between Phoenix and Utah, the Suns sent their 2031 unprotected first-round pick to the Utah Jazz. In exchange, they get first-round picks in 2025, that's this year, 2027, and 2029. Those picks can, and certainly this year most likely will be, Cleveland Cavaliers first-round picks that Utah owns from the Donovan Mitchell trade. What Utah is doing is they're trading 3 of their future first-round picks that they think that could either be the Cavs or the Wolves or their own down the line. By doing this, they're sending a signal that the Cavs picks are not going to be what they hoped the Cavs picks were going to be when they made the Donovan Mitchell trade. Because this year is the first year, the 2025 pick that Utah is getting from the Cavs. And that pick, I don't want to say is going to be worthless, but I'd be pretty surprised if it's anything other than 29th or 30th. The way the NBA draft works is different than the NFL draft, where, in the NFL, draft position corresponds with how you finish in the postseason. In the NBA, it's just your regular season record, reverse order of finish, basically. So the Cavs, if they finish with the best record in the NBA, they're going to get the 30th pick in the first round. That pick sent to Utah now would go to Phoenix. And these picks will likely get traded again. I think this is Phoenix trying to trade for Jimmy Butler. But I thought it was a really interesting thing that Utah is ready to potentially punt on the Cavs picks that they got for Donovan Mitchell. I think that it was just a very interesting thing. Now, that Suns pick in 2031, given the state of the Phoenix Suns, given Kevin Durant's age, who knows what the world could look like in 2031? Who knows what the Suns could look like in 2031? Who knows what the NBA draft could look like in 2031? That pick, certainly more valuable than any of these Cavs picks or Wolves picks in a vacuum. But the fact that that pick is deemed to be more valuable than potentially all 3 Cavs picks, or a mix of Cavs and Wolves picks, or a mix of Cavs, Wolves, and Utah picks, I found that to be a very interesting thing that involves the Cavs. Now, for the rest of today's show, it's going to focus a lot on Cam Johnson because his name has been one that has floated around a bunch as far as trade rumors go. And the Cavs are a team that frequently has been mentioned. I have heard from other teams that the Cavs do have interest in Cam Johnson as a trade target, and they should. He would be, in my opinion, a perfect fit for what they need. But it's not as easy as just saying, yeah, the guy's a perfect fit on paper. let's slide him into the team and it's going to work out great. Because you do have to remember there's a human element to all of this stuff. I think that we watch games and you know, we see how the team plays and we just think of these professional athletes at times as robots. And yeah, Cam Johnson would be a great fit, but there's no guarantee that it would work out in Cleveland. Now, it could work out great in Cleveland. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball to see that. But I do think it is an interesting conversation to be had about, do you want to make a talent upgrade? Because adding Cam Johnson to this roster would make this roster better at maybe sacrificing some of the great vibes, some of the all-time high vibes that the Cavs have right now. I don't know if it's worth it. I don't know that it's not, but I don't know that it is. Johnson obviously provides a ton of shooting. He's a really good 3-and-D player. I think he's a little bit playing out of his role right now with Brooklyn because they just have no creation. That Nets team obviously is a very bad one. And if he were to come to Cleveland, I think he would be an excellent fit alongside Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Jarrett Allen. And that also would put someone like Dean Wade in a bit more of a secondary role than what he's in right now. And I think that would probably get more out of him. And, you know, the bench would likely shorten a little bit because you do have to give up stuff to make a Cam Johnson trade work. But I just think it's a really interesting thing to think about. And the other thing that I do think sticks in my mind when we talk about a midseason trade for a team that has championship aspirations, because as I sit here and record this, the Cavs are 36-6. They have the best record in basketball. They're not the title favorite, but they are one of the title favorites, right, in the NBA. They've been that good. They deserve that respect. So that got me to thinking, well, what have other teams done in the past that have won championships, right? So I looked at the last 10 champions in the NBA. Last year, the Boston Celtics made a trade at the trade deadline. Traded Lamar Stevens for Xavier Tillman Sr. Tillman did not play in 11 of the 19 playoff games for the Celtics. He only played 3 times in non-blowout games. So he played in, you know, of the 8 games he played, 5 of them were he just played garbage time. They traded a second-round draft pick for Jaden Springer. Springer played garbage time in 4 playoff games for Boston. Neither of those guys really had any impact on whether or not the Celtics won the title last year. You go back to Denver, 2023. They were part of a big trade. Now, they were a minor part of a big trade, but essentially what they got was Thomas Bryant. Thomas Bryant in the postseason for the Nuggets, the year they won the title, 2023, played in 1 game out of 20. Accumulated 29 seconds on the floor for the Denver Nuggets in the postseason. Not very impactful. 2022 Golden State Warriors did not make a trade. 2021 Milwaukee Bucks made one of the more impactful trades that we've seen a champion make in the last 10 years. They traded for PJ Tucker. PJ Tucker played all 23 postseason games, started 19 of them, averaged 4 points a game. Are you sensing a trend here? The 2020 Lakers, and that season was obviously very different because it was interrupted by a pandemic, did not make a trade in season. The 2019 Toronto Raptors, now this is the one that sort of bucks the trend. They traded for Pau Gasol. They traded CJ Miles, Jonas Valanciunas, DeLon Wright, and a draft pick to Memphis for Marc Gasol. Sorry, I might have said Pau, but they traded for Marc Gasol. Gasol started all 24 postseason games, averaged just under 10 points, 7 boards, played 30 minutes a game in the playoffs. They do not win that title, in my opinion, without Marc Gasol. That is the most impactful trade a champion has made in the last 10 years. The Warriors, each of the years they won a title, did not make a trade. The year the Cavs won the title, 2016, they traded for Channing Frye. Now, Channing Frye was a big part of that team, but when push came to shove in the finals, and a lot of this was matchup based, he really didn't play in that series. So I just think it's something that I think in theory, trading for an impact player at the trade deadline sounds great in theory. You always want to upgrade your team. You want to be better going into the postseason. But so many times, those trades don't actually lead to championships, at least not the year that trade is made, right? Like the best case for this would be, well, the goal to win a championship is actually in June of 2026 And then you could look at, okay, well, the last time the Cavs won a title, they made a pretty big trade at the deadline, or before the deadline, I guess, the year before, where they acquired Timofey Mozgov and J.R. Smith and Mon Shumpert, and all those guys were big parts of that championship team. But ultimately, when you have a team that is good enough to win the title, and the Cavs are a team that is good enough to win the title this year, those teams don't get messed with too much. And I just think that is something to think about as we go through this process. Now, Cam Johnson is a perfect fit for this team. I truly believe that. But I don't know that it's something that's going to happen. I don't know that it's something that makes as much sense in actuality as it might on paper. So up next, Adam Armbrecht does a great job covering the Brooklyn Nets over at the Locked On Nets podcast. Next two segments are with him. We talked a ton about the Cavs potentially trading for Cam Johnson, what it would maybe take, and ultimately, where he thinks Cam is going to end up. He thinks he'd be a great fit in Cleveland, but like me, I think that, and he did too, that there's going to be another team that comes in with a deal that the Cavs just can't match through no fault of their own, because they don't have draft picks to trade, because at the top of the show, as I mentioned, those draft picks just got traded from Utah to Phoenix. And that is something the Cavs would do over 10 out of 10 times, because the Donovan Mitchell trade has been absolutely fantastic. So up next, my conversation with Locked On Nets, Adam Armbrecht. But first, today's show is brought to you by Game Time. I love going to live events, whether it's sports, music, theater, comedy. Went to a play in January. I'm at basketball games all the time. And one of my favorite things to do is be at a live event, right? I don't spend a ton of time in my apartment. I spend a lot of time out and about. Well, Game Time makes it even easier to get into those live events, because they've got tickets for all your favorite events, and they have a great new feature, Game Time Picks. Feature filters out all the fluff. You don't want fluff. You want the good stuff, right? So Game Time Picks only shows you incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste your time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. It's a great place to go. I did not go to the national championship game. I thought about it. Tickets were very, very expensive. But the best deals I saw were on Game Time. And it is the place I go when I'm looking for tickets. It should be the place that you go when you look for tickets. And what you can do is you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets by using Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Adam, first off, thanks for doing this. Super excited to talk about Cam Johnson, because that has been the name that has been floating around the NBA rumor mill as one of the hottest trade targets, not only for the Cavs, but I think a lot of teams across the NBA. And the Cavs are a team that has been listed by several prominent insiders, if you will, as a team with interest. I've heard myself that, the Cavs are a team that does have interest in them. That has been things I've heard from other teams that I've talked to. So the first thing that I want to dive into here is Cam Johnson's got a lot of interest from not just the Cavs, but other teams too. Why is he still on the Brooklyn Nets at this point?
Because the Nets are really bad and they're getting blown out in most of their games in the last couple of weeks. Once they moved on from Dorian Finney-Smith, and really even when they first moved on from Dennis Schroeder in the trade with the Warriors, there's the lack of ball handling, right? Lack of pure point guard facilitators, and then the talent level as well. But you just saw it really kind of fall off here. And we've also seen a somewhat strategic change here as far as minutes. The starters are playing mid-20s. Guys are, keeping well under 30. Guys in the bench rotation are getting into the court there as well. So I think there's less pressure here right now, because whatever version of this tank is going to look like for Brooklyn this year, and they made some mistakes, maybe early winning a few too many games, they clearly are at a talent deficit now where there isn't a lot of risk of winning, even with Cam Johnson. So that's probably reason one. And then reason two is because the deadline's February 6th, and there's still a couple of weeks to get teams interested and see if there's enough interest to drive up the price point from maybe who the Nets maybe already see as the top couple of suitors out there.
So, what do you think ultimately it's going to take for a team to trade for Cam Johnson? I think we've heard, various different potential packages in terms of draft capital, which is something that if you're a Cavs fan that wants Cam Johnson on the Cavs, that is something that I do think should concern you because the Cavs sent most of their draft equity over to Utah for Donovan Mitchell in a trade that they would do 10 out of 10 times over again. But what exactly are the Nets looking to get back in this type of deal?
They say two first round picks. So hard for the Cavs because they have 2 first round picks, but they can't send them both out in a deal. That's what
they can trade one first round pick. They can trade the 2031 first round pick, and they cannot notably too. I think this is more on a Nets end. They cannot protect that pick either. Like if the Cavs trade that pick, that it will be an unprotected first round pick.
And so here's so I think two first round picks is the asking price, and whether or not, as you say in the past, Sean Marks will say this is what I want for him, and some people say that's too high, or that you should always make sure you make the move. But he's shown historically he's willing to set his price point and not budge off of it. So 2 first round picks that can clear a lot of teams off the table, and the Cavs may be among them. The interesting part for me is if that's the asking price, we always talk about, well, not every first round pick is created equal. Right. So even right now, you talk about the Cavs, and it's not, I don't mean this as a slight. They are going to be really good. They are really good right now. And this window is going to be awesome for Cavs fans. And also, if I look out into 2031, that could be a very valuable first round pick for any team that ends up with it, as opposed to maybe a team that I would list among one of the top suitors in the Oklahoma City Thunder. But they're young and they have their core. And even 4 or 5 years from now, you may not think about them as favorably. So, but yeah, price point of 2 first round picks. I think we try to talk about young talent, young players, but those are also going to be looked at as either dart throws or players that were once regarded as higher talents, that were lottery picks, that were first round talents, and whether or not you can reclaim them. And I don't know how much the Nets really want to swim in those waters over the next, say, season and a half with all the draft capital they already have.
Well, right. And especially with where the Nets are at in their rebuild, like they're still obviously tearing this down a little bit because Cam Johnson is still on the team and hasn't been traded yet. They still have assets to move on from that they can garner more future better assets from. And that does lead me to talk about the whole, is a young, talented player that maybe hasn't necessarily proven himself to be a star, but has potential. Is that something like how likely is it that could replace one of those first round picks? Because that's where I think the Cavs could potentially get into this ball game. Whereas if, instead of Sean Marks and the Brooklyn Nets demanding, no, we need 2 first round picks, guys that are currently in 7th grade, we want those guys to be on the Nets at some point. Or could it be, hey, here's a 7th grader by virtue of a 2031 first round pick. And here's Jalen Tyson, who was the number 20 overall pick in this past spring's draft. I don't know how eager the Cavs would be to include Tyson. I know he's somebody that they're very high on, but is that something that you could see Brooklyn going, okay, well, maybe this type of player that does have promise, that does have potential, but we didn't actually draft him. Can that replace a pick?
If you go back to your draft board and you look at Tyson and you say, we actually maybe liked him, right? Even a little bit higher in the draft. We think that he's a really developable talent, right? Hasn't seen the court for Cleveland, this season. And I liked it. You go back to his college, played 3 different colleges in 3 years. Right. But by the time he gets that 3rd year, becomes a 20-point scorer. The assist numbers come up. Like there's a lot of things to like there. The volume on the 3-point shooting. I talked about him last week because I kind of stumbled into him looking over the Cavs roster. Now, he's interesting. It's funny that you say, like, is Cleveland willing to put him into a deal? The hard part about it is I'll throw out another name on the roster, like Isaac Okoro, who a season or 2 ago, when we talked about the Cavs as trade partners and swapping players for the Brooklyn Nets, we regarded Okoro as, oh, you get him in with his skill set. Now, another year and a half removed, you look at him, even though he's still only 23 years old and he was a former 5th overall pick. Right. Do we kind of already know? Like, we know whatever he's going to be, it's never going to live up to that hype. So I think that that's the hard part about trying to sell on young players, even though we know getting that future draft pick is still the same thing. It's the same offer, right? The potential of something. The big difference, I think, for the Nets as far as draft picks versus players is it's not just the opportunity to draft another young player. It's an opportunity to have another first-round pick to send somewhere else if a star becomes available. And that's probably the currency the Nets want to live in the most. And I don't know if a guy like Tyson, a guy like Okoro would represent that going forward. Like we just talked about, I don't think Okoro in a future trade has a first round pick value. So I wouldn't label him as a first round value if the Nets were getting him in a deal.
Sure. I think that's a fair way to look at it. And it is something that, like, this whole process fascinates me because we've seen, there have been some outlets that maybe say the Cavs are the favorites to land Cam. I don't necessarily know that I believe that, because what I keep coming back to, and I'm very curious what you've heard here as far as this goes, but what I keep coming back to is, at some point, if Cam Johnson is still on the Brooklyn Nets as of February 5th, and it's the day before the trade deadline, Oklahoma City and Sam Presti are sitting on a whole bunch of first-round draft picks, and they can go to Sean Marks and say, you want 3 of these? Just tell me what 3 you want, and they're yours, and we'll make something work. Like, I kind of think ultimately, and maybe, that is what the Nets want to happen here, but that is why I will say, with every day that passes, I think I believe a little bit more that it's possible Cam Johnson ends up in Cleveland. But I also think that at the end of the day, if OKC does want Cam Johnson, and I think he'd be a fantastic fit on that roster, I feel like they're just going to be able to go out and get him.
Yes. So there's that part of it, right? If there's a few teams at the table and they're making their offers, like you mentioned, Presti goes, what do you want? What's it going to take? Now, we've talked about how, like, having Nikola Topic would be like the guy that the Nets would say, like, Doug and I both agree. We're like, we want him. We know you got all these other young guys. That's the guy we want. And we know it's just like the promise of what could be, but we'll take that chance on that promise. And maybe that's the push or pull. Now, what's fascinating about that is I just talk about, it's almost, chewing my own words a little bit. Here's these young guys and what they could be, Tyson, but it's not Nikola. It's not what he could be. And in that instance, maybe OKC is able to sit there and say it's 2 first-round picks and it's Nikola, and we get the deal done. But even if it is the scenario you talked about, you want a 3rd pick? Like, we want them. As Doug pointed out the other day, they're 18th in 3-point percentage, right? Like, Cam Johnson just solves the one area they might be deficient in and puts them over the top. So from that standpoint, I believe that that's possible. The funny thing, I think, for Cleveland, because I can think about other teams, like we've talked about the Kings. They're fascinating because if you make a move like that, it's not even just about what does it do for you now. It might be the way to keep Fox in Sacramento and try to keep this thing together. So there's different reasons for teams to pursue a player like Cam Johnson. For the Cavs, it's like, I'll be honest, like, it's not that they don't need him. Every team needs a Cam Johnson, but they got a really good thing going. Like, so the Cavs might not fall into the category, plus having their deficiency in assets and picks right now. It's like, I don't know if they fall into the category of we need to move heaven and earth to go get Cam Johnson. And when the vibes feel like they're kind of at an all-time high right now in Cleveland, is the last thing you want to do, the version where I've even walked through of, okay, give us Karis LeVert. Maybe we pass him through somewhere else and the Nets get more, value for him. Okoro, Tyson, like whatever it may be, you're going to break up and change what that team looks like for the remainder of the season. And Cam Johnson's a veteran. He's a great locker room guy. He would fit in perfectly. So it's not like you're really disrupting it. But I do think in the hierarchy of teams that need to go get Cam Johnson, Cleveland is probably a little bit further down the list than 3 or 4 other teams that I could think of.
I do agree with most of that sentiment. And the one thing I talked about in the first segment before you jumped on was that it's very rare for title contenders or teams that ultimately go on to win championships that year to make a big move in the middle of the season. Of the last 10 teams that have won a title, the only 2 that made a trade for a starter at the trade deadline or like near the trade deadline was Milwaukee. Back the year they won it, they traded for PJ Tucker, who was very clearly their 5th starter and averaged like 5 points a game in the postseason, and Toronto, who traded for Marc Gasol the year they won it. And Marc Gasol was obviously a big part of that Raptors team and was a big part of what they were able to do in the postseason. But it's a really rare thing. And I do think that is something because you just don't see title teams, you don't see the chemistry get messed with all that often. So that was one of the things I wanted to ask about. Like, if he is traded to Cleveland or anywhere else, how do you envision him fitting in? And I know no one can expect you to understand what goes on in the Cavs locker room because you're not there. Like, you're not covering the team I cover, but I'm curious your perspective about Cam Johnson, the guy.
Yeah, I think what's nice from a, let's say, Cleveland perspective, right? And then from a Cam Johnson perspective, like I said, veteran, leader, like he is the veteran leader on the Brooklyn Nets for whatever that is in this iteration of their roster. He has been, this is the best season of his career. He has been phenomenal across the board. Now, Areas where I think it's interesting to think about his defensive value, which he does have, but doesn't really matter or get highlighted as much in Brooklyn because, again, the roster's such a hodgepodge. And you're bringing guys in and out of the lineups and everything else. But Cleveland has bigs. They have Jared Allen. They have Mobley. So the trickle-down effect of bringing in a Cam Johnson, because he's a big enough body, he's versatile enough to defend 3 positions on the court, you probably give yourself a little bit more versatility on a road from a rotation standpoint in Cleveland, along with the offensive value, right? And I just think about, even as good as Cleveland is in the three-point shooting, if you can put a player that's knocking it down at the percentage that he is right now on the court with Donovan Mitchell, just think about the access that you get down low, even after all the three-point shooting, right? Even after the perimeter looks, think about how the lane opens up that much better when you have another floor spacer like that out there every single possession. So, while I don't think Cleveland needs to be desperate for it, I can paint a very favorable picture about how Cavs fans go, oh, Cam Johnson's on the team now. And it just opens everything up that little bit more. It's interesting that you talk about, championship teams don't go and make these kinds of splashes. But I'll even kick open a little bit more of this from a Cleveland perspective. If you could find a way to do it, Cam Johnson's under contract. So you'd also be talking about 2 more years of having him there with Donovan Mitchell. So I mentioned Fox and the Kings before. There's this other part of this thing of how do you keep evolving this roster so that Donovan Mitchell keeps feeling like this is where it's at and I can keep competing and I can keep winning. Go to the finals this year. You want to win it? Of course you do. But even if you didn't, just knowing that your organization keeps pushing in for this, I think that might actually be maybe a needle mover, and you could speak to that more. It's like, is there that value beyond just what you do this year if you go get Cam Johnson for Donovan Mitchell and for the future of this team?
Well, I mean, the one thing I would compare it to in that aspect is the year before the Cavs won the title in 2016. They obviously went to the finals in 2015 and lost to the Warriors. That was the year they made a big consequential trade in season. They traded for J.R. Smith. They traded for Iman Shumpert. They traded for Timofey Mozgov. The year they won the title, they traded for Channing Frye, and Channing played in the postseason, but he was not a factor ultimately in the finals, mostly because of matchup purposes against the Warriors. I do want to, Adam, before we get out of here, I want to talk about how Cam's role could potentially change from what it is in Brooklyn now to what it could be in Cleveland. Plus, I want your prediction. We're going to do that next right here on Locked On Cavs. Thank you again for making Locked On Cavs your first listen every day. Find this anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Make sure you are subscribed as well. Adam, this year with what the Brooklyn Nets look like, and there have been, I think, a couple of different versions of this team at this point with the trades they've made, sending away Dorian Finney-Smith, sending away Dennis Schroeder. How different do you envision Cam Johnson's role being what it is now in Brooklyn, where maybe it's a little bit higher usage compared to what it could be if he's traded to Cleveland or OKC, another contender?
Yeah, I think it's just getting back more to the 3-and-D model of who he is as a player, right? So this year, one of the things that's been exciting is something that we thought we were going to see last year when it was the Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson, and that's the new core, and we're going to compete with this team. And it was the on-ball, the ability to ball in hand, take on defenders, right? Attack closeouts, get a little bit downhill going towards the basket, the baseline, get into the paint a little bit mid-range when called upon, and still knocking down an incredibly high percentage. The difference, I think, is you don't need to do as much of that. When you go to these teams, the reason why he's doing more of it is because there's no ball handlers in Brooklyn, right? It's Ben Simmons when he plays, but also he can't shoot, and nobody cares about him when they're on the defensive end of the floor as far as his ability to or willingness to attack the basket. Cam Thomas has not played a lot this season. After Schroeder leaves, again, a depletion of point guard talent. Keon Johnson has been playing significantly. Now you have D'Angelo Russell following the Lakers trade, and okay, that does change the dynamic again here, but you don't need Cam Johnson to do that. What I think is nice about it, again, because Cam Thomas has missed a ton of games this year, and you consider him to be the highest offensive talent on the Brooklyn Nets, obviously, is I think one area, so his on-ball has been better this year, Cam Johnson. What I think will be really exciting to watch is how he can be on ball, again, with a Donovan Mitchell on the floor with him, with 2 bigs on the floor, with Jared Allen, who has some perimeter shot to his game, right? If you have that, because the Nets don't have that either, by the way. They don't have a 5 that can shoot. Nobody does. Ben Simmons,
I mean,
point guard,
Cavs,
five,
I
whatever.
mean, right. I mean, you really want to talk about a five that can't shoot. Ben Simmons is that guy. He is a five that can't shoot. Jared Allen, like, he's taking these free throw line jumpers, but the fact that the Cavs can play Evan Mobley at 5 and he's shooting 40% from three right now on a decent volume, like, that is where I think, okay, this could really become deadly if that happens.
Yes, and I want to say perimeter shot, just foul line extended as you mentioned there. But Nicholas Claxton, they play him sometimes the 5, sometimes now they're playing Simmons and him together. Again, just an example of how bad the Nets roster is from a functional standpoint. But Nicholas Claxton doesn't shoot either, right? Day'Ron Sharpe, when he comes off the bench, doesn't shoot either. When they traded away Dorian Finney-Smith, the Nets used to play small ball 5 the last 2 seasons because it gave them that thing. So the functionality of Cam Johnson, it's like you almost can't even quantify how much better he'll be on a team like Cleveland, on a team like OKC, simply for the fact that those teams are built correctly because they're competitive teams that want to win championships. So when you have balance 1 through 5, when you have Mobley that can shoot from the outside, when you have Allen that's capable, and then also, by the way, can perform the adequate spacing, slide Cam Johnson in at your 3. I know that Dean Wade is started half the games this season. I think to this point for the Cavs. Slide him in instead of Dean Wade. And it's not a knock on Dean Wade. And by the way, though, so give a little more athleticism, a little more versatility defensively. That's what you're getting over top of Dean Wade. And then, by the way, put Dean Wade maybe more where you want him, on fewer minutes and coming in off the bench, right? So how you fill out the rest of your rotation gets improved by him as well. So I just think the specific role, at the top of your question, not to be long, is that 3-and-D value that he gets you, and that when you want him to do something ball in hand, because you have the right floor spacing and skill sets around him, you could actually see him being able to attack the paint a little more readily because it opens up, because you have the Donovan Mitchells of the world on that roster.
So the trade deadline is 2 weeks from tomorrow. 2 weeks from Friday will be the day after the deadline. That's how calendars work here. Typically. Where will Cam Johnson be on February 7th after the trade deadline? And if he's moved, what's the package look like?
So we talked about it the other day on Locked On Nets. We did put it at probably like 20-25% chance that Cam Johnson, the day after the deadline, is still a Brooklyn Net, and that they'll explore options in the offseason, in the draft, and anywhere else that they may want to utilize his value. As of right now, we just think that OKC makes too much sense. It's exactly what they need, and they are the team that can overpay if they need to. So you talk about package. The Nets want 2 first-round picks. I think they'll get the 2 first-round picks. When you look over at OKC specifically and the young talent, we've said this before, push for Nikola. Okay, even if they don't want to give him up, the only thing I'll say is in that scenario, there's nobody else on that roster that they're willing to part with. They're not giving up Isaiah Joe. We take him certainly. But there's nobody else that they're going to be willing to part with. Dang has come up, obviously, in these conversations. Dylan Jones has been thrown out there in these conversations. There's nobody else outside of Topic that I think the Nets would say that's first-round pick value. And at that point, it might just be salary matching and a 3rd first-round pick. I don't know if it gets that far. I think it's going to come down to whether or not there's at least 1 or 2 other teams that are talking about 2 first-round picks and something else. But that's where I think it's going to land. I'm hoping it goes with Nikola, but maybe it ends up being 2 first and just a slew of seconds to get the job done. I would love to see him on Cleveland. I mean, totally honest. I think it would be just such a great fit, and it would make for an exciting playoff run. I don't see, barring the Cavs going out and finding a way to turn Okoro into another first-round pick somehow, or to turn Tyson into that extra first-round pick. I find it really hard to see how they can get the package there that the Nets are going to pull the trigger on.
Yeah, I think you and I are on the same page. I think the Cavs are going to be interested until he gets traded, but I ultimately think he's going to be traded elsewhere because the Nets are just going to want too much draft capital that the Cavs don't have. It's not that they won't give up, it's that they're not allowed to give up. Adam, thanks so much for doing this, man. Very much appreciate the time. We'll have you on again soon.
You got it, always.
There he is. Adam Armbrecht does a great job covering the Brooklyn Nets over at Locked On Nets. If you want to learn more about the Nets, or more importantly, the Cam Johnson situation, make sure you check out that podcast every single day. And thank you to you for making Locked On Cavs your first listen today and every day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else. Drop us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. And if you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for me. Click subscribe. Hit that notification bell. I'll be back tomorrow talking about the Cavs game with the Houston Rockets.